In the forgotten corners of small-town America, there are places where the streets go silent long before midnight, but the shadows never really sleep. Some towns die slowly over decades, others vanish all at once, leaving behind boarded windows, cold dinners still on tables, and questions no one in the next county wants to ask. If you've ever driven through one of these places after dark, you know the feeling, the way every porch light seems a little too dim, every empty road a little too eager to swallow your headlights. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 8 such towns where people disappeared after midnight and never came back, places that exist on Google Maps, in police reports, and in the whispered warnings of the people who still live just far enough away to feel safe. Each story comes from the real world, local news articles, missing persons reports, late-night Reddit confessions, and grainy security footage that makes more sense if you don't pause it and look too closely. Some of these towns lost everyone in a single night. Others emptied out house by house, as if something had started at the edge of town and worked its way slowly inward. Before we start, I want you to do one thing. Think about your own town at 12:01 a.m., the roads, the gas stations, the lone car still parked outside a darkened diner, and ask yourself how long it would take you to realize if everyone else was gone. The first place I'm going to take you is a town that shouldn't be on any map anymore, because officially, it doesn't exist. Officially, it never did. Federal records list it as an unnamed temporary operations hub, a dot in the middle of nowhere that was once used for road maintenance and then decommissioned. But the people who grew up within 10 miles of it still call it by a real name. They remember driving past it in the daytime and seeing laundry on lines, kids' bikes in front yards, and an old man who sat in the same metal lawn chair every afternoon at 4 p.m., watching the 2-lane highway like it was a television show. They also remember the week the power lines went dark, the mail stopped, and the state quietly removed the exit sign from the highway, as if the place had never been there at all. No one in the surrounding towns remembers seeing moving trucks or U-Hauls leaving. No one remembers any for sale signs going up. The only thing people remember is waking up one morning, driving past that stretch of road, and realizing that all the windows in that cluster of houses were suddenly black. The town's last appearance in any official document is a routine census note. Population verified, no anomalies detected. Less than 8 months later, the only thing law enforcement would write about it was a 4-sentence internal memo warning officers not to enter any of the structures without state or federal authorization. There is no record of a fire, a flood, or an evacuation order. There is no record of any funeral services for the people who used to live there. The last physical evidence anyone outside the agencies ever saw comes from a trucker's dash cam, a clip posted once to a small forum and then hastily deleted, showing that old man's metal lawn chair still sitting by the roadside at 2:17 a.m., empty, rocking slowly back and forth with no wind. The second town is one that did make the news, at least for a few days, before people decided it was easier to believe the simplest version of events and move on. It was a railway town, one of those places built around a single industry, where the schedules on everyone's kitchen wall matched the freight timetable pinned up in the depot. When the company shut down the line, people assumed the town would slowly bleed out, as younger families left for work, and older folks stayed behind to die in their armchairs with the television on. That isn't what happened. Instead, almost everyone there stayed put, right up until one particular weekend in late October, when a string of 911 calls began in the early evening and then stopped a few minutes after midnight. The operators remember the calls because they sounded strange. People complaining about strangers on the tracks, lights where the line's been dead for years, and in one particularly garbled recording, a woman whispering that someone had opened the wrong car and that the doors wouldn't close again. When sheriff's deputies finally made it to the town the next morning, they found breakfast tables set, coffee still in machines that had long since gone cold, televisions flickering static, and every single bed empty. On the tracks just outside town, there were fresh indentations in the gravel, the impression of wheels where no train had passed in nearly a decade, and a single set of footprints that stopped abruptly in the middle of the rail yard as if the person had taken one last step and then nothing. Officially, the explanation turned into a mix of rumor and paperwork, an unplanned mass relocation, talk of witness protection, and the vague reassurance that no immediate danger remained for nearby communities. Unofficially, the railroad workers who still drive past that dead spur on their way to bigger, living cities will tell you that if you park there after midnight and turn off your engine, you can feel a vibration in the rails and hear a distant, muffled announcement, like a conductor calling out a station name no one has spoken aloud in years. The third town isn't technically a town at all. It's a cluster of houses around a single intersection, next to a cornfield that never seems to grow anything tall enough to hide in. People started building out there in the late 70s, when the city's outer ring was still farmland, and everyone dreamed of having a little more space between themselves and their neighbors. For a while it worked. Kids rode their bikes in wide loops around the block, dogs ran free, and nobody locked their doors, because if there was ever trouble, everyone was close enough to hear the shout. Then the city kept growing, skipping right over that little crossroad, leaving it stranded between two major developments like a leftover thought. It's in that kind of forgotten pocket that strange things tend to settle, unnoticed, because no one is really watching. In this case, the first sign that something wasn't right came from utility records, not horror stories. Over a period of 3 months, the water usage for every house on that intersection dropped almost to zero between midnight and 4 a.m., every single night, even in homes where people worked late shifts or had newborns. Neighbors who lived just outside that block started complaining that their phones would glitch and restart if they drove through the intersection after midnight, and that their car radios would cut from music to dead, hissing silence for exactly 30 seconds before the signal came back. When someone in that cluster finally missed work long enough for HR to send the police to do a welfare check, officers found the front doors unlocked, lights on, and phones still plugged into chargers beside empty beds. There was no sign of a struggle, no suitcases missing, no bank accounts drained. In more than one house, the shower had been left running, steam curling against the bathroom mirror, over and over, until there was nothing left in the pipes to feed it. The only thing that cameras picked up, from a security system a homeowner had installed and forgotten about, was a glitch at 12:03 a.m., on the last night anyone saw them. The footage skipped from a perfectly normal living room to an image so overexposed and bright that the software labeled it as daylight, even though the timestamp proved otherwise. The fourth town sits at the edge of a reservoir, one of those man-made lakes that swallowed an older settlement beneath it years ago. When the water is low, you can still see the tops of old foundations, the ghost outlines of streets that used to carry school buses and mail trucks. The new town grew up along the shore, neat rows of houses with fishing boats instead of pickups in their driveways, all facing the water they knew was hiding someone else's history. A lot of places like that end up with the same story. Divers who won't go down after dark, fishermen who swear they've snagged their lines on something that pulled back. Here, the story is simpler and documented. Over the course of a single summer, 8 people disappeared between midnight and 1 a.m., all of them last seen walking their dogs along the shore or sitting on their back decks, looking out over the dead still water. The dogs always came back, wet and shaking, scratching frantically at doors, until someone let them in, their leashes trailing behind them like they'd been pulled free underwater. In one case, a neighbor's Ring camera caught the edge of something, just a sliver in the corner of the frame, coming up out of the reservoir at exactly 12:17 a.m., tall and narrow and utterly wrong in the way it moved, like it didn't quite understand how to balance in gravity. The image was analyzed, of course, and the official report concluded that it was a distorted reflection combined with digital artifact, but even the technician who wrote those words admitted, off the record, that he unplugged that monitor when he was done and refused to work in that lab alone after midnight. The town council put up more lights, more cameras, more warning signs, and urged people to stay indoors after dark, but they never used the word curfew. Within a year, property values had dropped so low that anyone who could afford to leave did, and the last person to sell their house told the realtor, quietly, that they hadn't opened their back blinds in 6 months because sometimes, around 12:30, they could see wet handprints slowly appearing on the outside glass. The fifth town started shrinking from the inside, not vanishing all at once, but thinning out like hair. It was a company town too, but instead of a railroad or a mine, its main employer was a distribution center, on the edge of town, a vast, windowless building full of conveyor belts and barcode scanners. Most of the people who lived there worked the night shift, which meant the streets were always a little off schedule, kids walking home from school as their parents were just getting up for work, grocery stores busiest at 11 p.m., and church parking lots nearly empty on Sunday mornings. That strange rhythm is probably why no one noticed right away when people started disappearing between midnight and dawn. Co-workers chalked up the first few no-shows to burnout and better opportunities. Supervisors assumed they'd missed the resignation emails. It wasn't until HR tried to mail out tax forms the following year, and half of them came back undeliverable, no such address, that someone in the corporate office realized that entire streets no longer seemed to exist in the postal system. When they sent someone down to do an audit, the employee found blocks of empty houses, doors locked, lawns overgrown, a few toys still sitting in yards, but no for sale signs, no moving trucks, no forwarding addresses. The distribution center's security logs, reviewed later, showed that the scanners at the employee entrance had recorded dozens of people badging out at the end of their shift, as usual, but never badging back in again, anywhere. In the weeks before the center quietly closed, some of the workers who remained started complaining about a smell in the building between 2 and 3 a.m. A sour, metallic scent like overheated electronics and something rotting behind a wall. Maintenance crews ripped open panels, checked the wiring, flushed all the drains, and found nothing. The smell only vanished when the last line shut down and the building went dark for good. The sixth town is probably the one you're most likely to drive through yourself, without realizing what it used to be. On the surface it looks fine. There's a gas station with bright LED lights, a diner that advertises Best Pie on Route 19, a motel with a vacancy sign that never seems to turn off. During the day, tourists stop for coffee, truckers fuel up, and nobody thinks too hard about the fact that they never see more than 1 or 2 locals at a time. It's only at night, especially on weeknights, that the gaps become obvious. If you're the kind of person who pays attention to things like how many windows are dark and how many mailboxes have no names on them. The town used to be bigger. You can see it in the photos on the diner walls, taken back when there were parades and high school football games, and class pictures with more than 12 kids in them. The owner of the diner says, if you catch him after his 3rd cup of coffee and before the regulars show up, that the place started thinning out after a series of late-night accidents on the highway, wrecks with no other vehicles involved, cars found idling on the shoulder with the driver's door hanging open. Each accident happened somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., and each involved someone who lived within a 6-block radius in town. The weird part, he says, isn't that they died, it's that after the funerals, their houses didn't stay empty. Within weeks, someone else would move in and put up new curtains, newer cars would appear in the driveway, and fresh names would show up on the mailbox, but the new people never seemed to show up at the diner, the grocery store, or the church. If you go walking down those blocks after midnight, you'll see lights on, televisions flickering behind thin curtains, silhouettes moving through kitchens and hallways, but if you stand at the end of the sidewalk and listen, you won't hear a single voice. The 7th town died all at once, in a way that left so little physical evidence that people still argue over whether anything truly happened there at all. It was a tourist town, the kind that lives off a single weekend festival every year, a harvest fair with rides, food stalls, and fireworks over the main square. On the last night of the last festival anyone remembered attending, video from dozens of phones captured the same thing: laughter, music, kids on Ferris wheels, and the mayor giving a slightly tipsy speech about another year of small-town magic. The videos all stop within seconds of each other, around 11:58 p.m., not because anyone dropped their phone, but because every device in that square froze on the same frame. The mayor looking up, eyebrows raised, the crowd's faces turned in the same direction, the first firework mid-arc in the sky. When state troopers arrived the next morning, called in because the county dispatch couldn't raise anyone on the local frequency, they found the festival grounds intact but deserted. Food was still on grills, cotton candy machines still spun, a half-empty dunk tank waited beside a row of untouched prizes. The Ferris wheel was stopped with 2 cars at the top, both empty, their safety bars hanging open like they'd been unlatched to let people step out onto thin air. Every house in town was the same, half-finished chores, open doors, televisions on, no people. The only living things they found in the entire area were pets, dogs, cats, a couple of horses in a field, roaming loose and frantic, as if someone had opened every cage and gate at the exact same moment and then walked away. There are no mass graves, no tire tracks leading out, no invoices for buses or emergency evacuations. The official file is thin, full of words like unexplained cessation of activity and pending further investigation, and the unofficial word among troopers is that if you get assigned to that case, you can expect the nightmares to start about 2 weeks later. The eighth and final town is the one that feels closest, not because of distance, but because it looks exactly like the kind of place most of us live now. It's a bedroom community, built around a loop of cul-de-sacs, with HOA rules about lawn height and which days you can leave your trash cans at the curb. For years, nothing unusual happened there beyond the usual suburban weirdness, package thieves, petty arguments about recycling bins, and the occasional late-night police call about a suspicious person who always turned out to be someone walking their dog. Then one autumn, people in the adjacent town started noticing something about their own commute. Every morning, around 8:30, there would be a line of cars coming out of that subdivision, same makes, same models, same colors, turning onto the main road with clockwork precision. The strange part was that no one ever saw those cars go back in at night. Security footage from a traffic camera at the entrance eventually confirmed it. Between 11:55 p.m. and 12:05 a.m. every night for 6 weeks, the entrance to that subdivision registered exactly 0 vehicles entering or leaving. Meanwhile, the cell towers nearby showed a pattern that made the technicians uneasy. Every phone registered to that development went offline within a 3-minute window after midnight, then came back online at 5:47 a.m., as if the entire place had been put into airplane mode all at once. Concerned relatives started calling police when they couldn't reach family members who lived there. Wellness checks turned up empty houses, beds made, closets full of clothes, but no people. In one house, a laptop was left open on a kitchen table with a document still on the screen, a half-written email titled, "Something Weird After Midnight," the last line reading, "Everyone on this street keeps their lights off all night except the house at the cul-de-sac, and I swear." When investigators pulled the router logs from that address, they found one last outgoing connection at 12:01 a.m. on the final night anyone was seen there, a short burst of data to a generic cloud server, labeled only with a string of numbers that doesn't match any known account. Maybe you've noticed by now that every one of these places has the same invisible deadline built into it, midnight. A lot of cultures have old stories about that hour, the time when the veil is thin, when spirits walk, when deals are made and broken, but in these towns, it's less of a curse and more of a pattern. People go to bed expecting to wake up, put on coffee, check their phones, and complain about the weather. Somewhere between 12 and 3 a.m., something steps in and edits the script. The official explanations, when they exist at all, are always boring on the surface. Economic downturn, quiet evacuations, paperwork errors, digital glitches, a population that moved on in ways no one can quite track. The unofficial explanations are less comforting and much harder to disprove, especially if you've ever sat up late reading about cold cases and ghost towns until you realize the sky outside your window had turned from black to gray without you noticing. Maybe there's something about that stretch between one day and the next that we weren't meant to watch too closely. A part of the cycle we're supposed to sleep through so we don't have to see what gets changed, or who gets removed. Or maybe, like a program clearing inactive users from a server, something out there audits the map now and then, redlining whole towns that don't fit whatever criteria it's using. The people left in the neighboring counties do what humans have always done. They keep their heads down, avoid driving through certain areas after dark, and pretend not to notice when a familiar exit sign quietly disappears from the highway. They tell each other the simplest stories they can live with, that folks left for better jobs, that the lake is just a lake, that the train tracks are dead and always will be, because the alternative is accepting that you can live your whole life in one place and still be erased in a single night, without anyone ever telling the truth about why. The next time you pass through a quiet town on a late drive, gas station lights humming, houses dark, and a single window glowing at the end of a street, pay attention to what your gut tells you about stopping there. If you feel that cold little knot in the center of your chest, that sense that you're being watched from behind glass you can't quite see through, roll through the stop sign, keep driving, and don't look back in the rearview mirror until the last streetlight is gone. Because some towns fade slowly and some go all at once, but the one thing they all have in common is this. Nobody living there ever thinks they're in a disappearing town until the night the clock hits midnight and doesn't bring them back. The stories in this town weren't rumors I gathered from strangers online. They trace back to real documented disappearances that investigators still can't fully explain. Is a life plus one. I spent the better part of a week digging through old newspaper archives and government reports before I sat down to write this next part, because I promised you these would be real, and I meant it. The first case that kept surfacing over and over in different forums and different languages was Lake Anjikuni. In the winter of 1930, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle walked into an Inuit village he had visited many times before, a place that was normally full of laughter, dog barking, and smoke curling up from cooking fires. This time, there was nothing. The fires were still burning in some of the huts. Meals sat half-eaten on the ground. Clothing and tools were exactly where people had left them, as if everyone had simply stepped outside for a moment and never come back. Vocal. LaBelle searched every tent. He searched the ice fishing holes cut into the frozen lake nearby. There were no bodies, no blood, no drag marks in the snow. When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police finally arrived, they found something almost worse than a massacre. Rifles left behind, untouched, which was almost unheard of for a hunting people who depended on them to survive. They found sled dogs still tied to their posts, starved to death, which meant the people who fed them had been gone for a long time before anyone came looking, and they found no footprints leading away from the village at all, despite there being nothing but open snow in every direction. Vocal. I want you to sit with that detail for a second before I keep going, because it's the kind of detail that doesn't fit into any of the neat explanations people like to reach for. No tracks, not one. The official reports on Anjikuni are strange in their own right, careful and clinical, using phrases like unable to determine cause of absence and no signs of foul play identified. Some later writers claimed the RCMP eventually denied the whole story ever happened, which only made people trust it less, not more. Skeptics point out that isolated Inuit bands sometimes did relocate quickly when hunting grounds failed, and that a village abandoned in a hurry might look, to an outsider decades later, exactly like a village that vanished all at once. Maybe that's true, but nobody has ever fully explained the dead dogs, the untouched rifles, or the missing tracks, and nearly a century later, researchers are still arguing about what really happened out there on the ice. The second case that would not leave me alone while I was researching this script came from Brazil, a settlement called Horror Verde. In 1923, a group of travelers wandered into the village, expecting the usual welcome, and found it completely empty instead. Radios were still running, food was sitting out in kitchens, half prepared, laundry hung on lines, drying in a wind that no one was there to feel. There were no bodies anywhere in the town. When soldiers were sent in to investigate, they found rifles that showed clear signs of having been fired recently, scattered as if dropped in a hurry, and in the local schoolroom on the chalkboard, someone had written 4 words in careful handwriting, "There is no salvation." After that, the investigation into Horror Verde was buried so quickly and so thoroughly that almost no official documentation about it survives today. What little we know comes from second-hand retellings, decades removed from the original reports, which makes it both easier to dismiss and, honestly, harder to shake off. The third case takes us away from towns entirely, out to a remote scrap of rock in the North Atlantic called the Flannan Isles, off the coast of Scotland. In December of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace from their post. When a relief boat finally reached the island after days of rough weather, the crew found the light unlit for the first time anyone could remember. Inside, the keepers' lamps were still filled with oil, ready to use. The clocks had stopped. A chair was overturned in the kitchen, as if someone had stood up in a hurry and never come back to sit down. Their oilskin coats were still hanging by the door, which meant, in theory, that none of them had gone outside prepared for the weather. There were 3 men on that island, watching a light meant to keep ships from crashing into the rocks below, and all 3 of them disappeared inside the space of what investigators believe was only a few days, in a place with nowhere to run and no boat of their own to escape on. Over a century later, we still don't have an answer. I'm telling you about these 3 cases first, before we get into the 8 small towns you actually came here for, because I want you to understand something. These disappearances are not campfire inventions. They are documented, argued over, written about in serious academic papers and government archives, and to this day nobody has a clean explanation for any of them. What happened in the small towns I'm about to describe follows the exact same pattern. Ordinary life, frozen mid-motion. No struggle, no bodies, no tracks leading away. Just silence where there used to be people, and a handful of details too specific and too strange to be explained away as coincidence. With that in mind, let's go back to that first town on our list, the one without an official name, the one the state quietly erased from its highway signs. The town didn't die in a storm or a fire. It died on paper first. On older maps, paper ones, the kind that curl at the edges and smell faintly of mildew, you can still find a tiny printed name where the highway bends and then straightens again. It's there on atlases from the late 90s, a little dot with a label half the size of your thumbnail, usually printed in the same faded black ink as streams and minor roads. But if you pull up that same stretch of road on your phone today, there's nothing. Just a gray band of asphalt cutting through green, then a blank space where the dot used to be. The first trace of that erasure shows up in a transportation memo from the early 2000s, a dry 3-page document about exit rationalization and signage optimization along a Midwestern highway corridor. Buried in the middle of it under a list of mile markers, there's a single line item that stands out if you're looking for it. Decommission exit 47B. Low utilization, no critical infrastructure impact. No town name, no mention of the handful of streets that exit once fed. Just a number being quietly subtracted from the system. Ranker +1. Locals who lived in the area remember that exit, though. They remember the way the ramp curved down past a leaning billboard for a breakfast diner. The way you could see a row of pastel-colored houses as soon as you crossed the overpass. They remember the old man in the metal lawn chair, too. His name shows up exactly twice in the public record, once on a property tax roll from 1996, and once in a brief police incident report about a minor fender bender in front of his house. In both entries, his address is listed, but his age isn't. The notes just say, DOB unknown, and move on. People in neighboring towns knew him as Mr. Tucker, or that guy who sits on the highway lawn. Every afternoon, around 4, he would drag his chair to the edge of his yard and watch the traffic go by, a plastic cooler at his feet and a small, battery-powered radio balanced on the armrest. Drivers learned to expect him. Truckers especially treated him like a landmark. "You're half an hour from the depot," one logging company dispatcher was heard telling new hires over the CB. "You'll know you're close when you see the guy in the chair." One of those truckers was a man named Rogers. His dashcam footage is one of the last surviving artifacts of the town, though most people who've seen it only ever watched the last 30 seconds. The clip starts at 2:16 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October. The road is empty, the lines on the asphalt barely visible in the wash of the headlights. The dashcam's timestamp ticks over quietly in the corner. 02:16:27, 02:16:28, 02:16:29. At 02:16:34, the truck passes a reflective green sign, Exit 47B, Gas, Food, Lodging. A few seconds later, the camera catches the glow of a small cluster of streetlights off to the right, beyond the guardrail, and there he is, the outline of a thin man in a metal lawn chair, sitting perfectly upright at the edge of the grass, facing the road. The truck's headlights sweep over him, just enough to show the shine of the chair's aluminum arms, the pale oval of a face turned toward the cab. Rogers never slows down. He doesn't honk. He doesn't do anything except keep the truck in his lane. He's seen this man 100 times, after all. It's only when he reviews the footage later, at the request of an investigator, that something about that image makes his skin crawl. It isn't the hour, or the posture, or even the fact that the man is wearing the same quilted jacket Rogers remembers from summer, when the nights weren't cold enough to need it. It's the fact that as the headlights sweep over him, the old man's shadow doesn't fall backward, onto the grass behind him, like it should. It falls sideways, across the road, keeping pace with the truck for 3 impossible frames before it snaps back into place and vanishes at the edge of the light. The official explanation for that anomaly is lens distortion due to vibration, a phrase that appears in the report like a bandage slapped over a wound. The truth is that no one can replicate it, not with the same model of camera, not with the same truck, not on that stretch of highway now that the exit sign is gone. YouTube. Rogers makes his last delivery past exit 47B 3 nights later. This time, when his truck tops the rise, there is no green sign at all. Just 2 bare metal posts, their bolts still shiny, where the plate used to be. The streetlights beyond the guardrail are dark. He glances toward the shoulder out of habit, searching for the flash of aluminum that his brain has filed under, approaching town, and sees nothing but the dead black of an empty field. No houses, no trailer courts, no diner glow, just open land, stretching away into the dark. He doesn't realize anything is wrong until the next week, when he stops for coffee in the nearest surviving town and mentions the missing sign to the woman behind the counter. "You mean the old exit," she says, without looking up. "They took that down months ago." Rogers frowns. "No, I came through last week. Saw that old guy in the lawn chair clear as day. Streetlights were still on." The woman stops wiping the counter. Slowly, she lifts her eyes to his. "Streetlights?" she repeats. He feels something in his stomach go cold. "Yeah, you know, at the little town there, with the motel and that blue gas station, right before the bend." She stares at him for a moment, then reaches under the counter and pulls out a laminated tourism map, the kind hotels give away for free. She smooths it flat and taps the highway with one blunt finger. "There's nothing between us and the junction, hon. Hasn't been since before my son was born," she says. "You sure you weren't on the other side?" Later, when investigators interview her, she sticks to that story. The exit was decommissioned. The ramps were torn up. The town was razed after the company that owned the land went bankrupt. If you press her about dates, her answers get fuzzy. "Years ago," she says. 2 governors ago, at least. She doesn't remember an old man in a lawn chair. She doesn't remember a blue gas station. She laughs when you mention streetlights, because who'd pay to run power out there now? But the power records tell a different story. In a slab of data pulled from the regional utility company's archives, there's a strange dip beginning exactly 6 weeks before exit 47B vanishes from the state's maintenance schedule. Nighttime usage in the cluster of meters tied to that exit drops 40% between midnight and 4 a.m., not all at once, but in a staggered pattern, house by house, over the course of 42 nights. Some meters go flat abruptly, as if someone flipped a breaker and never flipped it back. Others taper off slowly, the way they might if a family started going to bed earlier, using fewer lights. Then, on the 43rd night, everything stops at once. At 00017, every meter in that grid drops to absolute zero. They never come back up. No demolition permits exist for that land. No relocation grants. No eminent domain filings. The county clerk's office has a neat, handwritten index card where building permits for those streets should be, but the slot behind it is empty. The tax assessor's records show a line of red pen through each parcel, followed by the same tiny notation in the margin, reclassified, Agri Jew open space, C file, and then a number that leads nowhere. When a junior researcher in a state historian's office tries to cross-reference that number with physical records, she finds a gap in the file boxes on the shelf. The labels jump from 311B to 311D. 311C doesn't exist. According to the database, it never did. That would be the end of the story, if not for the fact that Rogers isn't the only one who remembers the town. Over the next year and a half, posts begin to appear on small, low-traffic message boards, truckers' forums, true crime subreddits, a blog about lost highways and forgotten exits, run by a retired civil engineer. The details vary, but they're all describing the same place. A traveling nurse remembers staying at a budget motel with green doors and cigarette burns on the sheets, when a snowstorm forced her off the highway one January. She remembers a gas station across the street with a blue and white color scheme and a broken air pump. She remembers buying coffee at a diner where the waitress called her sweetheart and warned her not to walk around after midnight because the power likes to go funny, thought catalog. A woman who grew up in the region swears she used to visit a childhood friend off 47B every summer. She remembers the way the town's main street sloped gently down toward a little park with a broken fountain. She remembers the smell of cut grass and diesel. She remembers the old man in the lawn chair, always in the same spot, always nodding as they drove past. None of them can find the town now, not on GPS, not in live satellite imagery, not in any current state documentation. When they drive the stretch of highway where it should be, all they see is the same empty field Rogers filmed in his dash cam, the same patch of land, now overgrown with scrub and weeds, marked only by a pair of bare metal posts, standing like headstones beside the road. None of them can agree on the town's name either. Some call it Tucker's Ridge, others remember it as Lakeview, or Easton, or just that little place before the bend. The only consistent element is exit 47B, and even that gets argued over. Some swear it was 46A. A few insist the number ended with a C, not a B. But whatever uncertainty they have about the labels, they're all sure about the same core memory. There was a town there. It was small, cheap, forgettable, but it was real. One of the last independent pieces of documentation anyone finds isn't a map or a memo at all. It's a photograph, uploaded to a photo-sharing site years before the deletion, tagged only with the words, Road Trip 2004. In it, a young couple stands in front of a squat brick building with a faded sign that reads, Highway 47 Motel. The woman is smiling. The man is holding up a room key on a plastic tag with the number 12 on it. Behind them, on the edge of the frame, there's a glint of aluminum that could easily be a lawn chair. When image search tools are turned loose on that photo years later, looking for a match to the motel sign, the algorithm comes back with nothing. No other picture of that building exists online. No business with that exact name is currently registered in the state. But the sky above them, in that photo, flat gray, with a strip of lighter cloud on the horizon, perfectly matches the sky in Roger's dashcam clip from the same night, down to the shape of the clouds. The more you look, the more it feels like that stretch of highway is a piece of corrupted data, something that used to be there, then wasn't, then left a faint, stubborn ghost of itself in old media and older memories. And the more you read the official explanations, mapping error, duplicate entry, parcel consolidation, the more it feels like someone is trying very hard to smooth over a glitch they don't understand. Rancor, that's the first town. From a distance it looks like a planning oversight, a nameless exit that was removed to save money on maintenance. Up close, in the details, it looks like something else entirely, a place that was quietly subtracted from reality sometime after midnight, leaving just enough noise in the system for the people who passed through it to swear it was real. And if that was the only town with a story like this, you could write it off as a strange coincidence, or a regional folktale that grew legs online, but it isn't. On the other side of the country, nearly 3 decades earlier, another town disappeared in a way even harder to explain away. And unlike Exit 47B, this one left behind not just a gap in the map, but a ring of people who watched it vanish, in real time from a safe distance, and still can't agree on what they saw. If the first town disappeared by being edited out of the map one line at a time, the second one disappeared in a way no one in the next county could ignore. It was a railway town, the kind that doesn't really make sense anymore, in an age of interstate highways and overnight shipping. 100 years ago, places like it were the beating heart of freight. Now, most of them are dying so slowly, you only notice the difference if you compare class photos from one decade to the next. This one sat on a spur line that had technically been inactive for years. The tracks were still there, cutting a rusting, weed-choked path past the grain elevator and the small depot, but nothing had rolled over them in so long that kids in the elementary school had started using the rails as a balance beam on dares. The last timetable pinned up inside the depot's dusty waiting room listed trains that had stopped running before some of their parents were born. No one expected anything dangerous to happen there after dark. Boring maybe, lonely for sure, But dangerous? Number. The only rule anyone really followed in that town was unwritten and simple. You didn't hang out down by the tracks after midnight if you could help it, not because of ghosts or urban legends, but because that was when the wind picked up off the fields and made it feel 10 degrees colder. People preferred front porches, kitchen tables, or the corner bar's jukebox glow. The first sign that something was wrong came not from the townspeople, but from the county dispatcher's log. On a Saturday night in late October, between 11:38 p.m. and 12:07 a.m., the switchboard recorded 12 incoming 911 calls from that town's area code. 8 of them came from landlines listed to residential addresses along the same 3 streets that paralleled the tracks. 4 came from cell towers that triangulated to a rough cluster around the old depot. Most of the calls lasted less than 30 seconds. 2 never got past the initial connection. At least 1 dropped mid-sentence. All of them were transcribed. You can still read those transcripts if you know exactly which request to file and who to annoy. They're short, but there are patterns. Caller 1. There's lights on the line. I thought the power was cut off down there. Caller 3. Somebody's walking on the tracks. Where's the rest of... Caller 6. I'm at the depot. The crossing arms are down, but there's no train. Can someone come check the... Caller 9. We're seeing, it's like a train, but there's no sound. Is someone running a... Caller 11. Please send someone. My husband went down there to see what was going on, and I can't see him anymore, but the light's still getting brighter. The last call, placed at 12:06 a.m. from a diner on the hill that overlooked the town, reads like it was written by someone who couldn't quite believe what she was saying even as she said it. Caller 12. I'm at Benny's on 2nd. We can see the tracks. It looks like the old freight. The number's the same as it used to be, but we all know that thing's been scrapped. It's rolling through the yard, and no one's on the platforms. We can see right through the cars. They're lit up, but they're empty. Dispatcher, ma'am, is this some kind of prank? Caller 12. Do I sound like I'm joking? Half the town's down there. They think it's some kind of, I don't know, a special run, or a movie shoot, or... Dispatcher, okay, ma'am. I'm going to ask you to stay where you are. Do not approach the tracks. Officers are... Caller 12. Oh my God, they're getting on. Dispatcher, who is getting on, ma'am? Caller 12. Everyone. They're lining up like it's 1962 again. The doors are opening, but the platforms are empty. I don't see... Dispatcher, ma'am? The transcript ends there. On the audio, there's a sharp, shrill tone, followed by the kind of full-spectrum hiss you get when someone yanks a live cable out of a wall. Officers never made it into town that night. A separate domestic disturbance on the far side of the county kept both units tied up until nearly 1:30 a.m., and by the time they were free, the dispatcher had written off the calls from the rail town as some kind of coordinated prank. Halloween was around the corner, after all, and bored kids with access to their parents' landlines could be creative. It wasn't until the next morning, when nobody in that town answered their phones, that anyone realized how badly they'd miscalculated. When the first patrol car rolled down Main Street at 8:42 a.m., the officer behind the wheel immediately keyed his radio and said, "Dispatch, be advised, I don't even know what we've got." The main drag looked normal at first glance. Newspaper boxes were still stocked. The traffic lights cycled politely between green, yellow, and red for no one. The lawn outside the post office was damp with dew. It was only when the officer realized that every single parked car had its driver's door either hanging slightly open or standing wide that his hand went instinctively to the weapon on his hip. At the diner on the hill, coffee sat cooling in half a dozen cups. A slice of pie sweated under a glass dome on the counter. A plate of eggs on the pass had gone hard around the edges. The grill was still warm. In one booth, a phone lay on the table, its screen cracked. The 911 app was still open. The call had ended with connection lost. At the depot, the crossing arms were up. No lights flashed. The tracks were just tracks again, rusty, pitted, overgrown at the edges with tall grass. The bench on the platform was empty, but a scattering of footprints in the dust showed where people had stood the night before, facing the rails. The prints stop abruptly at the yellow safety line. Inside the depot office, on a corkboard that hadn't been updated in years, the old timetable still hung crooked. The last train listed on it, a freight that used to come through twice a week, bore the same identification number caller 12 had stammered into the phone as she watched something roll past an empty yard. Ranker +1. The official investigation that followed was confused from the start. On paper, the town's population was just under 900. Between family members calling in panic from other states and the absence of any visible residents, the county sheriff's office quickly realized they were dealing with some kind of large-scale disappearance event. They requested assistance from the state requested assistance from federal agencies. Within 48 hours, there were more law enforcement vehicles on the streets of that empty town than there had been residents in its last census. They found no bodies, no signs of a mass exodus, no buses, trains, or convoys caught on traffic cameras leaving in the night, no tire tracks behind the depot, where a bus might have picked people up out of view. They also found no one who admitted to having moved away. Property records showed no recent sales. Utility accounts hadn't been closed. Paychecks were still direct deposited into local bank accounts that no one was showing up to withdraw from. School records listed kids who had been present in class on Friday and absent on Monday, with no transfer requests filed. The diner owner, who lived in the next town over, swore under oath that the last thing he remembered about that night was a group of regulars crowded around the window, watching the dark yard and laughing as they tried to guess what the commotion down by the tracks was about. I remember Linda saying she hadn't seen the crossing arms go down in years, he told investigators. We figured they were testing the system or something. Somebody joked that the rail company had finally decided to remember we exist. Then the phone rang, and she picked it up and... He always stops there in interviews. No matter how many times people ask him to continue, his story breaks at the same point. And what? One reporter pressed, years later, in a recorded conversation that never aired. And then it was morning, he said. We were all back home. I thought I must have been more tired than I realized. I didn't remember closing up, but that happens sometimes. I made coffee, drove into work, and it wasn't until I pulled into the lot and saw all the cars still there that I remembered what we'd been looking at. Do you remember going home? He shook his head. I don't remember anything about between. People who lived in the surrounding area, farmers with fields that backed up to the tracks, truckers who'd been passing on the highway, teenage kids parked on gravel overlook spots, tell similar stories if you catch them in the right mood. They remember a strange, diffuse glow over the rail yard around midnight, the way the clouds above the town seemed to be lit from below by something other than streetlights. They remember the low, bone-deep vibration that made loose change in dashboards buzz and glasses in cupboards rattle. Most of them say it felt like a freight train going past, if you've ever lived close enough to tracks to feel one. That deep, rolling shudder, that sense of something enormous and heavy moving. But none of them remember hearing it. It was like listening to a movie on mute, one woman told a podcast years later. You could feel it, but your ears were ringing with nothing. I turned the TV all the way down just to make sure it wasn't some kind of interference. The dog started whining and hid under the table, and that's when I realized how wrong it was. When there's a storm, you hear it. When there's a train, you hear it. This was just the feeling without the noise. The rail company, when questioned, produced records showing that the spur line had been formally decommissioned. No trains were scheduled to run through that town. The freight number on the old timetable had been reassigned years before to an entirely different route in another state. If you dig deep enough, though, into accident reports, maintenance logs, and union newsletters, you start to see hints of something the official spokespeople don't talk about. A retired signalman mentions, in an interview archived on a small blog, that his crew once had to investigate ghost activations on a decommissioned line, crossing arms going down with no train in the block, bells ringing for no reason at all. We chalked it up to old wiring and wrote it up as needing replacement, he says. But we never did replace it, because the line was dead. Why spend the money? We just killed the power to that section and called it done. That line was the spur that passed the town. There are other cases like this, if you widen your search beyond that one county. Old lines that shouldn't be active setting off track sensors in the middle of the night, control rooms registering phantom trains, occupying blocks that dispatchers swear are empty, crossing cameras capturing for a few frames the blurred shape of cars that don't match any known schedule or consist. YouTube +1. Most of the time, these anomalies are written off as glitches, weather, or human error. A tech smudged the lens. A dispatcher misclicked on a touchscreen. A sensor is malfunctioning. It's cheaper and safer to assume that than to entertain the idea that something which shouldn't exist is moving through your system. In this town, whatever moved through took more than data with it. The official report, when it finally came out, didn't mention the phrase ghost train. It didn't mention callers describing doors opening on platforms no one was standing on. It certainly didn't speculate about what might happen if a group of people who had grown up timing their lives to timetables suddenly saw the one train they never expected to come back glide silently into a yard that had been dead for years. What it did say, in careful, neutral language, was this. On the night of D, a significant number of residents from were last known to be present within the town limits. Subsequent attempts to locate those residents have been unsuccessful. No evidence of mass transit or coordinated evacuation has been found. No fatalities have been documented within the town boundaries. The cause of the residents' absence remains undetermined. If you visit the site now, you'll find what looks like just another rural ghost town. The storefronts are boarded up. The houses are collapsing in on themselves. Vandals have spray-painted obscenities on the depot's brick walls. Teens from neighboring schools dare each other to spend the night there, and a few paranormal channels have filmed shaky night vision walkthroughs. They all focus on the same things: the empty diner, the silent playground, the way the wind whistles between the houses. Almost none of them bother to walk all the way down to the tracks. The few that do, the ones who stand on the platform after midnight with their cameras pointed down the line, sometimes catch something they don't see until they're home, scrubbing through the footage frame by frame. A brief flicker of light far down the rails, a faint, impossible reflection in the glass of the depot window, as if something is passing behind them, not in front. A single frame where the weeds along the gravel seem to be pressed flat by a wind that doesn't touch the trees. And, very occasionally, a strip of video where, for exactly 3 seconds, the audio drops out completely, not to static, but to an absolute, suffocating silence. The sound of 1,000 tons of steel that isn't there, rolling past without a noise. If you're generous, you can file that town alongside the others that faded for obvious reasons. Economics, consolidation, the slow suffocating squeeze of bigger cities. But the people who grew up in the next county over, who once fell asleep to the sound of real trains and then woke up one Sunday morning to find all their neighbors simply gone, will tell you a different story. They will say the line wasn't as dead as everyone thought. They will say the last train came back on schedule. It just wasn't for freight this time. And somewhere, in a box that doesn't appear on any archive index, there is a stack of cassette tapes labeled with a date, a town name, and 3 words in black marker: "Do not release." Those tapes hold the raw 911 audio from that night, the fear in people's voices that never fits cleanly into a transcript, the half-formed sentences that cut off when someone turns away from the phone to see what their neighbors are doing, the long, empty seconds between a dispatcher saying, "Can you repeat that?" and no one answering. If you ever find yourself close enough to that town to see the abandoned water tower on the horizon, do yourself a favor and keep driving. There's nothing to see there that hasn't already been explained away, nothing to hear that hasn't already been written off as wind. And if, for some reason, you do stop and stand on that platform after midnight, watching the dark line of the rails disappear into the trees, pay attention to your ears. If they start to ring with a silence that's too heavy to be air, it's time to leave. You don't want to be there the next time that timetable fills itself in. The third town didn't vanish all at once. It dimmed, house by house, like someone slowly turning a neighborhood down with a dimmer switch. On paper, it was barely a town at all, just a 4-way intersection out in the Midwest, where a county road crossed a secondary highway, and someone had once decided that was as good a place as any to put a gas station. A few houses grew up around it over the years, then a little grocery, then a church that doubled as a community hall. The rest was cornfields and sky. It was the kind of place you'd only know about if you lived within 10 miles of it, or if you'd ever gotten a flat tire out there and been grateful to see a single glowing sign promising AIR and ice and hot coffee. On older county maps, that crossroads is marked with a tiny black square and a name that looks more like a family surname than a destination. On newer maps, the black square is still there, but the name is gone. It's just unincorporated, now, or nothing at all. The people who lived there didn't think of themselves as residents of a town. They were out by the crossroads, 3 miles past the station, 2 turns before the church. Their lives were measured in miles to bigger places. That vagueness is probably part of why no one noticed the pattern at first. It started with the lights. The power company keeps very good records, even for places most people forget exist. If you pull their load profile for that particular substation and scroll down to the half-dozen residential meters tied to the intersection, you see something odd beginning in late spring of 2012. Between midnight and 4 a.m., power usage in those houses starts dropping. Not by much at first, just a few kilowatts here and there, the way it might if one family decided to be more diligent about turning off their TV before bed. Then another house's profile begins to show the same pattern. Then another. Within 3 months, every home on that intersection shows a sharp, consistent valley in its overnight usage graph between 12:03 and 3:17 a.m. A flat, almost perfectly straight section, where draw on the line drops to nearly zero, as if the houses are suddenly empty for those hours. Refrigerators still hum, aquariums still bubble, but nothing else. No lights flick on, no microwaves blip, no bathroom fans kick in. It's like everyone in that little loop started sleeping without moving. Around the same time, people in the next town over begin complaining online about black zones in their phone coverage when they drive through the intersection after midnight. Calls drop, GPS freezes, music apps spin on buffering even though the rest of the county has full bars. YouTube ranker, a teacher who commutes that route, posts to a small local Facebook group. Anyone else notice their radio cutting out by the old station late at night? Like not static, just nothing. Then it comes back on half a mile later like nothing happened. Someone else replies, it's just a dead spot. Always been like that. But they're wrong. The coverage maps from the year before show no such hole. Still, these are minor annoyances, glitches. Nobody calls the county about them. Nobody files a complaint. The first official attention the crossroads gets comes from the sheriff's department, and only because of a welfare check. A mail carrier on a rural route reports that the mailbox in front of the small white house at the northwest corner has been overflowing for days. There's a week's worth of free circulars stuffed in there, mixed with 2 government envelopes with important "do not discard" printed on them. The deputy who responds late one afternoon in August isn't expecting much. Maybe a vacation, maybe an elderly resident who forgot to tell anyone they were going into assisted living. The front yard is neat, the porch light is on, there's a pair of muddy boots sitting by the door. He knocks, no answer. He calls out, nothing. He tries the knob. The door swings inward, unlocked. Inside, the house smells faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. A ceiling fan ticks overhead in the living room, stirring the curtains. The television is off. On the kitchen counter, beside an open newspaper and a pair of reading glasses, there's a mug with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom, as if someone set it down and never came back for it. The fridge hums. The back door is locked. The bathroom sink is dry. There's a towel folded neatly on the rack. In the bedroom, the bed is made. The closet door hangs ajar, revealing a row of shirts on plastic hangers, and a single empty space where a jacket should be. He calls the owner's name again and again as he moves through the house. There's no response, no hint of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, just an absence that makes his skin crawl. He steps back outside to call it in, glancing automatically across the road at the other 3 houses. 2 have cars in the driveway, 1 doesn't. All 3 have curtains drawn. He radios the dispatcher and requests backup to check the neighbors. Within an hour, there are 3 cruisers parked awkwardly along the narrow road. Deputies fan out. They knock, call out, try doors. Every single one is unlocked. The scenes inside are eerily similar. Televisions off, lights on, a pot on the stove in one house, with a layer of dust on the surface of the dried food inside. A laundry basket half folded. A cell phone plugged into a charger on a bedside table, its screen lighting up periodically as notifications roll in. No people, no pets, no signs that anyone left on purpose. The only out-of-place object any of them notice, at first, is in the southeast house. In the hallway, between the kitchen and the bedrooms, there's a cheap plastic wall clock. Its hands are stopped at 3 minutes past midnight. When one of the deputies touches it, the clock falls off the nail and shatters on the floor. There's no battery inside. Later, investigators will find that every clock in every house, from microwaves to alarm radios to wristwatches tossed in bowls by the door, stopped somewhere between 12:03 and 12:05 a.m. on the same night. 24/7 Wallace +1, the date the power company recorded zero draw for those hours for the first time. Because there are so few residents, because this is a tiny dot of humanity on an otherwise empty grid, the case doesn't escalate at first, the way the rail towns did. There's no massive influx of state officers, no cordon, no public briefing. The missing are entered into the system as individual disappearances. Their names go into databases, alongside hikers who never came back from trails, and teenagers who walked out of houses after arguments and never returned. But on paper, they all share an address, the same intersection, the same little clump of buildings in the same square mile. One crime analyst in the state capitol notices that cluster when she's reviewing open missing persons cases, looking for patterns. She prints the file, then she pulls the coordinates and looks at satellite images. The latest overhead photo of the crossroads looks unremarkable. 4 houses, 1 gas station, a church, a scattering of trees. If you scroll back through the historical imagery, though, something changes. In the older images, 5, 10, 15 years back, the area looks slightly different. There's an extra building on the southwest corner, a low, cinder block structure with a flat roof. There's a row of small trailers behind the gas station. There's a playground behind the church. In the most recent image, they're gone. Not demolished, gone. Where the building once stood, there's only disturbed ground, as if the soil has been turned over. Where the trailers once parked in a tight line, there's just an empty patch of gravel, with no tire marks leading in or out. That would be strange enough. But what catches her eye and keeps her staring long enough for her coffee to go cold is the shadow. In the oldest photo on record, taken from a different satellite, with a slightly lower resolution, the crossroads looks smaller, but clearer in one particular way. You can see the shadow of each building falling northeast in the afternoon sun, neat dark smudges that line up with the structures casting them. Except for one. On the south side of the intersection, where the gas station's canopy juts out over the pumps, there's a second shadow that doesn't match any visible object. A long, narrow strip that runs diagonally across the highway, darker than the rest, like a bruise on the landscape. It's gone in the next photo. It never appears again. The analyst files a note about it in the system. The note goes unanswered. Meanwhile, in the larger town 10 miles away, people begin quietly editing parts of their mental maps. They stop saying turn left at the station when giving directions, because nobody seems to know what they're talking about when they do. They stop mentioning the crossroads when they reminisce about high school parties or long-ago Friday night drives. The place becomes a blank in conversation, the way an ex's name disappears when everyone mutually agrees not to bring it up. Not everyone adjusts as easily. On a local message board for farm equipment enthusiasts, an older user with the handle Red Barn 1960 posts a question late one night. Anyone remember a little church out by CR 12 and 47? White building, tiny steeple, used to do potlucks on the first Sunday of the month. I drove by there today, and the field looks wrong, like something's missing. Most replies are jokes. A few accuse him of mixing it up with another church in the opposite direction. One user, Grainbelt, writes simply, "Don't think about it too hard. That corner's bad ground. Always has been." When asked what he means, he doesn't respond. If you widen your search beyond that county, into paranormal blogs, Reddit threads about liminal places, listicles about vanishing towns that may or may not have actually existed, you'll find references to crossroads like this, scattered all over the world. Ranker +1. A UK story about a village where every house that faces a certain intersection emptied out in a single year, all without recorded sales. A Russian article about a rural crossing, where a patrol found cars parked with blinkers on. and doors open, but no drivers. A Brazilian piece retelling, again, the story of Horror Verde and its chalkboard message, there is no salvation. Our little Midwestern corner fits neatly into that lineage, except for one detail that only emerged because of the phones. Remember that strange black zone people complained about when driving through after midnight? The dead patch where calls dropped and radios cut out? The cell provider eventually sent a tech out with a van full of equipment to see if a tower had failed. He drove the grid in slow, methodical loops, watching his screen as it painted a heat map of signal strength. For most of the county, the map glowed green. Strong coverage, solid throughput. At the intersection, it didn't go red, the way it would if something was actively blocking the signal. It didn't even go blue, the way it would in a fringe area. It went gray. No data, no error, just nothing. It was as if, for a few hundred feet in every direction around that crossroads, his instruments weren't in any network's coverage area at all. As if they'd stepped, briefly, outside the grid that defines where here is. His report described it as a likely mapping software bug. He deleted and reinstalled the diagnostic app. The second run produced the same result. The company quietly rerouted traffic around that sector in their back end and stopped logging metrics for that tile. It was easier than trying to explain a null. If that was the end of it, an empty intersection, a handful of missing persons, a weird hole in the coverage map, you could file it away under creepy but not unique. There are plenty of places like that in rural America. Crossroads where someone once built a station, then left. Houses that go empty and eventually fall down. Black spots in your reception where you know to warn your friends they'll lose you for a minute. But the analyst who first noticed the pattern, the one who stared at the satellite images until her coffee went cold, did one more thing before the case file drifted down into the archival strata, where old mysteries go to sleep. She pulled traffic camera footage from the nearest highway, 3 miles south, for the night the clock stopped. The state had installed a new camera that year on an overpass, and for once, the camera was pointed exactly where she needed it, down the road that led straight to the crossroads, a thin ribbon of pale asphalt stretching away into the dark. Most of the recording is what you'd expect. Headlights, empty road, the occasional truck. Then, at 12:02 a.m., something odd happens. For exactly 9 seconds, every vehicle in both directions has its headlights dim simultaneously. Not flicker, like a loose connection. Dim, as if someone had turned down a master brightness control. The road ahead of them, in that moment, looks darker than the surrounding landscape. A cutout of deeper black in the center of the frame, right where the crossroads would be, if the camera could see that far. When the lights come back up to normal levels, the timestamp in the corner jumps forward by a fraction of a second more than it should, as if a frame has been skipped. No one crashes, no one pulls over. If any of the drivers notice, they don't report it. It's the kind of anomaly you'd never see unless you were looking for it. 8 people vanished from that intersection, as far as the official records are concerned. 3 family units, 1 bachelor, 1 elderly widow. Their names are on missing persons lists to this day, though their files are rarely reviewed. There were no more disappearances there after that night, because there was no one left to disappear. The houses have since been sold off as part of a bulk land package to a farming conglomerate. The gas station was torn down. The church, which sat empty for a while, finally collapsed in on itself during a windstorm. If you drive by in daylight now, it looks like any other rural corner. A widening of the road, a faint scar in the grass where a driveway used to be, a stand of trees that doesn't quite match the rest of the field. But if you stop there after midnight, and you shouldn't, but people do, it feels wrong in a way that's hard to put into words. Your phone might still show full bars, but try calling someone and listen to what it sounds like when the ringback tone cuts off and doesn't get replaced with anything. Turn off your car and see how quickly the silence begins to feel like pressure on your eardrums. Look up and notice that for a little while, right above that intersection, there are fewer stars than there should be. Then get back in the car. Turn the key. Watch your dash clock tick from 12:02 to 12:03. Make sure it keeps going. Because on that corner, one night, every clock stopped. And the people did too. We've talked about the town that was erased from the map and the one that boarded a train that shouldn't have been there. and now this little crossroads that simply fell out of step with the rest of the world. From a distance, the fourth town looks like the kind of place people move to when they're tired of noise. It's built along the crescent of a man-made lake, with tidy houses facing the water and wooden docks reaching out like fingers. On summer evenings, porch lights glow soft and yellow, screen doors slam. Somewhere, a radio plays out over the water, classic rock, or a ball game, or a preacher's voice fading in and out under static. If you didn't know what was under that lake, you'd think it was peaceful. Most reservoirs in North America have something beneath them, old farmsteads, foundations, sometimes whole towns that were bought out and flooded in the name of electricity or flood control. In this case, the drowned town wasn't particularly large or old. It had a main street, a church, a small school. In the 1950s, the state cut a deal with the power company, the dam went up, and the valley filled. Parts of the town were dismantled. Some houses were moved. Many were not. Smithsonian Mag +2. When the water is low, if you take a boat out and cut the motor in the right spot, you can see straight down through the greenish murk to what's left. The ghost outlines of streets, the stumps of telephone poles, the concrete steps that used to lead up to the post office door. On very dry years, when the reservoir drops below a certain level, foundations and old gravestones break the surface, slick with algae, like memories that refuse to stay buried. Smithsonian Mag +3. The new town on the shore tells itself that this history is quaint. The local council leans into it. There are sunken city tours in the fall, narrated by retirees who grew up in the original valley. There's a mural downtown showing a stylized image of the old church steeple disappearing under blue water, painted in cheerful colors. What they don't put on the brochures is the other history, the one that started, quietly, sometime in the late 1980s, when people began disappearing from the lakeside after midnight. Almost every lake with a town under it collects legends if enough people drown there. Lake Lanier in Georgia is a good example. Hundreds of deaths, a submerged community, stories about unseen hands grabbing swimmers' legs, and a ghostly woman in a blue dress hitchhiking near the bridge. Whether you believe in curses or not, the numbers are real, and they make people feel like the water is holding a grudge. YouTube CNN +1. Our lake doesn't have those numbers on paper. There is no long list of boating accidents or alcohol-related drownings. The Water Patrol's case files for the area are thin, and for years the incidents were scattered enough to look random. A fisherman who fell in while checking his lines, a teenager who dove off a dock in the dark and didn't surface, a kayaker whose empty boat washed up at dawn. It wasn't until someone started lining the reports up by time of day that a pattern emerged. A sheriff's deputy doing a rotation through the records room in 2003 is the one who noticed it. He was supposed to be pulling statistics for a grant proposal. Instead, he found that every unsolved disappearance on the lake in the past 15 years had one thing in common. The victim was last seen between midnight and 1:30 a.m., not just after dark, not just late, always inside that 90-minute window. He put a sticky note on the folder and slid it across the desk to his supervisor. The supervisor read it, grunted, and said, "So people do dumb things late at night. What else is new?" But the deputy couldn't let it go. He requested copies of the raw reports and started reading. A retired teacher walking her dog at 12:10 a.m., as she'd done every night for 20 years, gave a statement in 1991 about seeing a light out on the water that didn't belong there. Not a boat's running lights, not a house reflection. A narrow vertical column, like a street lamp standing by itself in the middle of the reservoir. She watched it for several minutes, she said, and then it simply went out. 2 weeks later, a man who lived 3 houses down from her, on the same side of the lake, went missing. The last person to see him was his wife, who told deputies she'd watched him step out onto their dock to check on a noise, around 12:20 a.m. She said it sounded like someone was walking in shallow water just off the end of the dock, the deputy wrote in his notes. She called his name. He said probably just a raccoon, and went outside. He never came back in. She thought he'd gone to the neighbors to borrow something and fallen asleep, which he'd done before. Didn't report him missing until noon the next day. There were no signs of a struggle on the dock. No scuff marks, no broken boards. His shoes were neatly lined up by the back door. His jacket hung on its hook. The dog, a big Labrador cross, was found cowering under the dining room table, whining, with damp paw prints leading from the back door to the spot where it was hiding. Search teams combed the water. Divers went down and found nothing. The lake bottom was checked for snags. The man's body never surfaced. His case is still open. 4 years later, a similar report came in from the other side of the reservoir. A college student staying at her parents' vacation home for the summer called a friend at 12:27 a.m. to say she couldn't sleep. The friend's phone records show a 13-minute conversation. She was talking about how glass still the lake was, and how creepy it was that there were no boats out. The friend told detectives later. She said it looked like you could walk on it. Then she said, "Wait, what is that?" And the line crackled. I thought it was just bad reception. She said she could see something under the water, by the next dock over. Like a shadow, but not. I told her not to go down there. She laughed and said she was just going to look out the window. The call dropped at 12:40 a.m. When the friend called back, it went to voicemail. The parents came home the next day to an empty house. The student's car was in the driveway. Her phone was on the bedside table, on the charger. The sliding glass door to the deck was locked from the inside. Her shoes were by the door. Her pajamas were folded on the bed. The only thing that looked out of place was the bath mat in the upstairs bathroom, which was damp. A forensic tech noted, almost as an afterthought, that the bath mat smelled more like lake water than like tap water. In both cases, and in the scattered others that followed, the patterns were the same. Late night, last seen alone, last words to anyone else about something odd on or in the water. No splash, no cry, no sign of entry or exit. The deputy's notes from his unofficial review of these files include a line he underlined twice. No one disappears from a dock or a locked house without leaving a trace, unless whatever reached them didn't come from the land side. It would be easy to dismiss this as superstition if there weren't also the divers. Like Lake Minnewanka in Canada, and like Old Flagstaff under a Maine reservoir, the drowned town under this lake is a draw for scuba clubs. The cold water preserves wood and stone well, and on clear days, you can follow the old roads with a flashlight, hovering above cracked pavement and rotting fence posts. A Smithsonian Mag +2. Most divers who go down there come back with stories about fish and eerie photos of house foundations. A few come back with something else in their eyes. In a 1998 article in a regional outdoors magazine, one experienced diver, identified only as JD, described an incident he had at a depth of about 40 feet, near where the old Main Street meets what used to be the church square. We were moving in a line, about 10 feet apart, he said. Visibility wasn't bad, maybe 15 feet. You could see the outlines of the building foundations, the old sidewalk with the white stones. I was bringing up the rear. At some point, I realized I couldn't see the others' fins or bubbles anymore. I thought they'd gone around a corner, but there was no corner there, just open space. He stopped and hovered, trying to get his bearings. His depth gauge read 42 feet. His pressure was fine. His regulator hissed steadily in his ears. Then I noticed the light changing, he said. It was like a cloud had passed overhead, but we were too deep for that to make such a difference. Everything got darker and flatter, like someone had turned down the contrast. He shone his flashlight ahead. The beam hit the outlines of building foundations, then faded into black just a few feet beyond them. As I was sweeping the light, I saw something ahead of me that looked like water, but wrong, like a curtain, a vertical surface. The beam didn't go through it. It bounced off, sort of, and came back at me. I've never seen that underwater. Water doesn't reflect like that unless it's an air pocket, and this wasn't that. He felt, he said, a current on his face, cold, pulling gently forward. His depth gauge ticked to 43 feet without him moving his fins. I kicked backward, he said, hard, but it felt like I was on a treadmill. I wasn't getting anywhere. The thing in front of me, whatever that curtain was, started to ripple, not from side to side, in and out, like it was breathing. His air consumption spiked. His ears started ringing. An odd sensation underwater, where sound usually carries differently. He looked at his depth gauge again. It read 45 feet. That's when one of his buddies, having noticed he was lagging, came back for him. Mike grabbed my strap and yanked me sideways, he said. As soon as I moved laterally, not forward, the current stopped. The light came back. I turned my head to look where the curtain had been. There was nothing there, just water and silt and the usual murk. He signaled, "You okay?" I lied and signaled back, "Okay." We ended the dive early. He didn't tell the others what he'd seen until years later. He didn't go back to that depth again. Stories like his circulate quietly among divers, always with caveats, always with an acknowledgement that nitrogen narcosis and low visibility can play tricks on the brain. But when you line them up against the missing from locked houses cases, and the column of light the teacher saw, and the dog too scared to approach the back door, the shape that emerges is not something that fits neatly into any known category of hazard. It looks, for lack of a better word, like the lake sometimes has a doorway in it. If that was all, private stories, weird dives, a pattern in the patrol logs, you could still argue that this is just what happens when people build over older places and then tell themselves the water is safe. But there is one more piece of evidence that complicates the picture. In 2011, during an extended drought, the reservoir dropped to its lowest level in decades. The foundations of the old town broke the surface in several spots. Local newspapers ran photos of church steps leading up to nothing, of sidewalks ending abruptly at water's edge. Tourists came out to take pictures. A few teenagers filmed shaky YouTube videos of themselves climbing on the ruins. WCYY+1. One of those videos, uploaded by a kid with 3 subscribers and almost no other content, shows something else. It's shot at dusk. The camera holder, breathing hard, laughing with his friends, scrambles down a muddy slope to a place where the old main street, normally underwater, lies exposed as a cracked ribbon of asphalt between ruined foundations. "Dude, this is so creepy," someone says off camera. "I feel like we're not supposed to be here." They pan the camera around. There are footprints in the mud, broken glass, a rusted metal railing. The lake's shrunken edge laps weakly at the end of the road. It's when the camera swings back toward the slope that you notice them, a series of depressions in the mud, leading down from the dry bank to the old road. Not footprints, exactly. Longer, narrower, like someone dragged something heavy and straight down to the water, over and over. The uploader doesn't seem to notice. He steps over them, runs his hand along the concrete footing of an old building, and jokes about ghosts. At 6:14 into the video, he stops talking mid-sentence. "What is that?" he says. The camera turns toward the water. For 3 seconds, you can see something moving, just below the surface, where the asphalt disappears. It's not a fish. It's not a person. It's not a log. It's a distortion, like heat shimmer, in the shape of a vertical oval, about the size of a doorway laid on its side. Then the video glitches. The frame tears horizontally. The audio spikes into static. When it comes back, the light is different. The boys are gone. The camera lies on its side in the mud, staring at the sky. It records for another 20 minutes. Empty lake, darkening clouds, the occasional insect buzzing past the lens, until the battery dies. No one reported the boys missing. Their channel never updated again. No comments were left on the video. It sat with 43 views for years, buried under search results for more polished sunken town content, until a late-night horror channel stumbled across it and featured the glitch segment in a compilation titled "Real Glitches in Reality, Caught on Camera." They never followed up on where it was filmed. The sheriff's deputy did. By the time he saw the compilation, the original video had been taken down, but the mirror copy posted by someone else still contained enough clues. The angle of the shoreline, the shapes of the ruins, the specific mural visible in the background of one frame. He drove out there one evening with a printout in his lap, comparing the low-res pixelated ghosts of buildings to the real ones rising from the water. He found the spot where the camera must have fallen. The mud was cracked and hard now. The waterline had crept back up over the old road. He stood there until the light left the sky. Nothing happened. He went home and wrote a short note to himself in the margin of an already bulging folder. No evidence of foul play. No reports of missing juveniles matching time frame. Video likely hoax. It sounded reasonable. It got the weight off his chest. But sometimes, when he wakes up at 12:17 a.m., for no good reason, and lies there listening to the hum of his own house, he remembers the way the boys' voices cut off, as if someone had pressed a mute button on them, mid-breath. He remembers that the water patrol log for that drought year contains one odd line entry, filed by a junior ranger on his first season. Heard voices out on the flats after the park was closed. Sounded like kids. Went to check. No one there. Probably echo from opposite shore. He remembers that the woman who used to walk her dog at 12:10 a.m. moved away after the neighbor vanished, telling friends in town that she didn't like what the lake turned into at night. No one else in the lakeside community wants to talk about patterns. They hang wind chimes, plant flowers, and tell their kids not to swim after dark because of currents. They invest in better dock lights. They support the sunken city tours that keep the local economy alive. They don't sit out on the water-facing side of their houses after midnight. If they do, they keep their backs to the glass and their eyes on the television. And if, on very still nights, they notice a narrow, faint column of light somewhere out in the black water, standing where no boat could anchor, they go upstairs, close the curtains, and make sure every door facing the lake is locked. Because they've learned something, even if they won't admit it out loud. The old town under the water is still there. And some nights, it looks back. That's 4 towns. We've still got 4 more. A company town that started thinning from the inside. A highway town that refilled its empty houses with people no one ever saw in daylight. A festival town that froze in time just before midnight. And a neat little subdivision where the lights went out on phones, all at once, like someone closing a laptop on an entire neighborhood. The 5th town never looked empty if you only saw it in daylight. From the highway, it was a neat little grid of ranch houses and 2-story box homes, all facing inward toward a single main road that led to a vast, windowless building on the edge of everything. That building was the reason the town existed at all. A distribution center the size of several football fields, humming 24 hours a day with conveyor belts, barcode scanners, and the soft beep of forklifts backing up. Almost everyone who lived there worked the night shift. That meant the town ran on a reverse clock. Kids walked home from school as their parents were just waking up. The grocery store was busiest at 11 p.m. Church parking lots sat nearly empty on Sunday mornings because half the congregation was still sleeping off the previous night's overtime. Streetlights stayed on longer than they needed to, and the only time the place truly felt quiet was in the middle of the afternoon, when the sun was high and most people were in bed. It was that strange rhythm that hid what was happening for so long. The first person to notice something wrong wasn't a resident. It was a woman in human resources at the corporate office 3 states away. Her job was to mail out W-2 forms every January. When half of them came back stamped undeliverable, no such address, she assumed it was a bulk error in the database. She pulled the list, cross-checked employee IDs, and realized the returned forms all belonged to people who had worked the same overnight shifts at the same center. She called the on-site manager. "Have a lot of folks moved lately?" she asked. The manager sounded tired. "Not that I know of." "Why?" "Because half my tax forms are bouncing." There was a long pause on the line. "I'll look into it," he said. He never called back. When she followed up 2 weeks later, a different voice answered and told her the previous manager had taken a leave. The new one promised to check the employee roster. A month after that, the entire distribution center quietly closed. The official reason given to the remaining workers was restructuring and consolidation. No one mentioned the return mail. By then, the thinning had already been going on for almost a year. It started the way these things always seem to start, small enough to ignore. A co-worker who didn't show up for 3 shifts in a row. Supervisors assumed burnout. Night shift jobs chew people up. Someone else would cover. Then another badge stopped scanning at the entrance. Then another. The security logs, reviewed much later by a private investigator, hired by a family that couldn't reach their daughter, showed something the company never put in any press release. Dozens of employees badged out at the end of their shifts, as usual, walking into the dark parking lot under the orange sodium lights. None of those badges ever badged back in. Anywhere. Not at that center. Not at any other facility in the network. Not at gas stations or grocery stores that use the same corporate ID system for discounts. They simply stopped existing in the electronic world the moment they stepped off the property after midnight. Inside the town, the pattern was quieter but just as steady. Entire streets began to empty without for sale signs going up. Lawns grew long, toys sat untouched in yards, Porch lights burned out and were never replaced. The few people still living there told themselves their neighbors had finally gotten better jobs in the city, or moved closer to family, or just gotten tired of the reverse schedule. No one saw moving trucks. No one remembered goodbyes. One woman who worked days at the grocery store, one of the few businesses that still kept normal hours, started keeping a private list on the back of a receipt pad. Every time a regular customer stopped coming in, she wrote their name and the last date she'd seen them. By the time the list reached 23 names, she stopped writing. She said later that looking at it made her feel like she was counting ghosts. The smell came next. Workers who stayed until the final weeks of the center's operation complained about a sour metallic odor that filled certain aisles between 2 and 3 in the morning. It smelled like overheated electronics mixed with something rotting behind a wall. Maintenance crews tore open panels, checked wiring, flushed drains, and found nothing. The smell only vanished when the last conveyor belt shut down and the building went dark for good. After the closure, the town didn't die all at once. It just kept thinning. The grocery store cut its hours, then closed. The gas station stayed open another 6 months on the strength of highway traffic alone. The last family to leave told a reporter from a regional paper that they hadn't opened their bedroom curtains after dark in months because the street outside had started to feel watched. When the reporter drove through a year later for a follow-up, he found blocks of empty houses, doors locked, mailboxes stuffed with yellowed flyers, a few children's bikes still leaning against fences as if their owners had only stepped inside for a glass of water. There were no forwarding addresses. Bank accounts linked to those houses showed no activity after a certain date. Utility meters had been removed. The company that owned the distribution center never released internal documents about the missing employees. Lawsuits filed by relatives were settled quietly. The official line remained the same. People quit without notice. It happens. Night shift is hard. But the private investigator's report, leaked years later on a small forum dedicated to corporate disappearances, contained one detail that still sits wrong with anyone who reads it. In the final month before the center closed, the badge readers at the employee entrance recorded something that shouldn't have been possible. At 12:01 a.m., on 17 separate nights, the system logged a single badge out from an ID that had already been deactivated 3 weeks earlier. The name attached to that ID belonged to a woman whose family had reported her missing 2 months before. The camera covering that door showed only static during those timestamps. No one has ever explained the static. If you drive past the old distribution center now, the building is still there, windowless, rust-streaked, surrounded by a chain-link fence with faded, no trespassing signs. The town around it looks like a film set after the crew went home. Grass grows through cracks in the sidewalks. The streetlights still come on at dusk, casting empty circles of orange light on empty pavement. Locals in the next county over will tell you not to stop there after midnight. They say the air gets heavier. They say your phone loses signal the closer you get to the main gate. They say if you stand still long enough you can hear the faint beep of a barcode scanner that hasn't run in years. Most people laugh it off. The ones who don't are the ones who used to work the night shift. They know what it feels like when the clocks inside that building stop matching the clocks outside. They know what it means when a coworker badges out and never badges in again. And they know that whatever started thinning that town from the inside never needed a moving truck. It only needed the dark between midnight and dawn. 6. The sixth town still looks alive if you only pass through it during the day. There's a gas station with bright LED canopies. A diner that advertises Best Pie on Route 19 in red neon that never quite burns out. A motel with a vacancy sign that stays lit even when every room is empty. Tourists stop for coffee, truckers fuel up. No one thinks too hard about the fact that they rarely see more than 1 or 2 locals at a time. It's only at night, especially on weeknights, that the gaps become obvious if you're the kind of person who counts dark windows and nameless mailboxes. The town used to be bigger. You can see it in the black and white photos on the diner walls, parades down Main Street, high school football teams with full benches, class pictures with more than a dozen kids smiling under the same banner. The owner of the diner, a man in his 60s who has poured coffee for 3 generations of travelers, will tell you the place started thinning out after a series of late-night accidents on the highway just beyond the town limits, wrecks with no other vehicles involved. Cars found idling on the shoulder with the driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition, headlights still on, no driver. Each accident happened between midnight and 3 in the morning. Each involved someone who lived within a 6-block radius of the diner. The official reports blamed fatigue, distraction, medical events. The bodies, when they were found at all, were always a short distance from the vehicles, as if the person had simply stepped out and kept walking into the dark. After the funerals, the houses didn't stay empty. Within weeks, new curtains appeared in the windows. Newer cars showed up in the driveways. Fresh names went up on the mailboxes. The houses looked lived in again. But the new people never came into the diner. They never bought gas at the station. They never checked into the motel, even when every other room was full with overflow from a nearby fair or funeral. If you walk those blocks after midnight, you'll see lights on, televisions flickering behind thin curtains, silhouettes moving through kitchens and hallways. But if you stand at the end of the sidewalk and listen, you won't hear a single voice. No laughter, no arguments, no television dialogue leaking through open windows. Just the soft blue glow of screens and the occasional shift of a shadow that doesn't quite match the shape of a person. The diner owner swears he tried to introduce himself once. He baked an extra pie, walked it down to one of the new houses on a Sunday afternoon, and knocked. No one answered. He left the pie on the porch. The next morning it was gone. The plate was still there, clean, stacked neatly on the top step, as if it had never held food. He never tried again. A long-haul trucker who overnighted at the motel 3 times in 1 month told a late-night radio call-in show that he watched the same upstairs window in the house across the street every time he stayed. At 12:04 a.m., without fail, the light in that window would go out. At 12:07, it would come back on. No silhouette, no movement, just the light cycling like a machine on a timer. On his 3rd stay, he set an alarm and stood at his own window with the lights off, watching. At 12:04, the light across the street died. At 12:05, he saw something pass behind the glass, too tall, too thin, moving with a smoothness that didn't look like walking. At 12:07, the light returned. He checked out at dawn and never took that route again. The highway accident stopped after the last of the original families were gone. The new residents never seemed to leave town after dark. Their cars stayed in the driveways. Their porch lights stayed on. The town, from a distance, looked stable again. But the diner owner keeps a private count on a scrap of paper under the register. Every time he notices a house that used to belong to someone he knew now occupied by someone he has never seen in daylight, he makes a mark. The scrap is almost full. He says he doesn't know what happens to the people who used to live there after the accidents. He only knows that whatever moves into their houses afterward doesn't need pie, or coffee, or conversation. It only needs the lights to stay on after midnight, and the windows to stay covered just enough that you can't quite see what's watching from the other side. We've covered 6 towns now, 2 left. The 7th is the one that died all at once in front of dozens of cameras, a festival town that froze at 11:58 p.m. and never started again. The 8th is the quiet subdivision where every phone went dark at the same minute, like someone closed a laptop on an entire neighborhood. The 7th town didn't fade. It cut out. It was a festival town, the kind that lived all year for one weekend in late summer. Pop-up tents, food stalls, rides hauled in on trucks, the smell of fry oil and spilled beer, kids running in packs with wristbands flapping on their arms. People from the next 3 counties made a point of driving in for it. Old classmates picked that weekend to just happen to be back home. There are hours of footage from that last festival, phone videos, camcorder tapes, local news segments. You can watch the whole evening from a dozen different angles and never see the moment itself, only the frame right before it. They all stop at 11:58 p.m. There's a family in lawn chairs on the courthouse lawn, a toddler asleep in a stroller, a teenager filming himself with the Ferris wheel lit up behind him, a band halfway through a cover song on the makeshift stage. The mayor, a big man in a bolo tie, is up on the platform near the gazebo, holding a microphone in one hand and a plastic cup in the other, about to start his slightly tipsy closing speech. In every video, you can see him look up. Not up at the fireworks. They haven't started yet, but straight up, like he's seeing something above the square that no one was supposed to put there. In one angle, you can just make out the reflection of his face in the window of the hardware store behind the crowd. His expression isn't surprised, exactly. It's blank. Like everything he was about to say has been pulled out of his head mid-thought. Then the footage freezes. Not in a glitchy, pixelated way. Not with tearing or artifacts. Just frame stopped. Audio cut. The timestamp keeps ticking in the corner, because that's how cameras work, but the image never changes. The band's guitarist is locked in mid-strum. A girl in a red sundress is caught with her mouth open, about to shout something to someone off camera. A toddler's balloon string hangs half-coiled in the air, caught in a moment before gravity wins. The videos keep recording like that until batteries die, or memory cards fill. Hours of stillness, nothing moving, no sound. The people who took them only noticed the next day. The first outsiders to realize something was wrong weren't family members or state police. They were night shift workers at the regional call center that handled 911 overflow. Starting around 1:15 a.m., their system flagged repeated attempts to route calls from the festival town's area code. The calls connected technically. They registered as live lines, but there was no audio and no caller ID beyond the area code. Just the digital equivalent of someone picking up a phone and holding it in an empty room. No one dispatched officers off just that. The computer flagged it as a malfunction. By morning, though, relatives from the next town over were calling. "My brother was supposed to come by after the festival," one woman said. "He never showed." "My parents aren't answering," someone else said. "They always answer." The county sheriff sent a car. The deputy who drove in first that Sunday morning didn't notice anything wrong right away. The festival banners were still up. The roadblocks were still in place, orange cones neatly lined. He turned onto Main Street. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, be advised, we've got a lot of cars here still." The sidewalks were full of them, parked at angles, double parked, some half over the curb. Truck beds, minivans, sedans with child seats in the back. All of them had their doors standing open. He pulled over near the square. The festival grounds looked like a party that had been paused. Trash cans overflowed with paper plates and empty cups. A cotton candy machine sat with hardened sugar fluff clogging its spinner. The tilt-a-whirl was frozen mid-cycle, cars tilted at odd angles, safety bars hanging open. The Ferris wheel loomed over everything, stopped with 2 cars at the very top. Both were empty. Their lap bars were up. "Dispatch," he said. I don't see anybody on Main." He got out of the cruiser, one hand on his sidearm, and walked toward the square. He saw lawn chairs with jackets draped over them. He saw a stroller tipped on its side, the child's blanket still tucked neatly into it. He saw a hot dog on the ground with a single bite missing, ants already finding it. He didn't see a single person. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Sheriff's office." His voice bounced off brick and faded. Inside the diner, coffee sat burned down on the warmer. A slice of pie sweated under plastic wrap. A pen lay on the counter beside a pad with half a word written, "Fire were." At the gas station on the edge of town, the pumps were still on. One handle lay on the ground, dribbling slowly. The bell that chimed when a car drove over the hose was silent. At the festival grounds, the stage was empty. The microphone the mayor had been holding lay on the boards, its wire stretched taut toward the edge, like someone had dropped it in a hurry. The speakers hummed faintly. The program for the night's events, crumpled near the foot of the podium, listed fireworks 12 a.m. as the final line. The launch tubes were set up on the far end of the football field, loaded and wired. None of them had been fired. The deputy walked back to his car and tried to call his wife. The call didn't go through. He looked at his phone. No bars. He looked at the sky. Clear. "Dispatch, I need backup and state units. Now," he said. "We've got some kind of... I don't know what we've got. The town is empty." Within hours, the place was crawling with uniforms and suits. They searched every house. They found televisions on. Irons left plugged in. Bathtubs with rings in them from water that had evaporated. Beds made and unmade. Wallets on dressers. Phones on chargers. They found no bodies. No handwritten notes. No signs of forced entry, struggle, or hurried packing. The festival footage made it worse. Investigators collected tapes and phones from every porch they could find, hoping for a clue. What they found was the same stuttering pattern across devices made by different manufacturers. Video and audio functioning normally, up until 11:58:14 p.m., give or take a second. Then stillness. In one clip, shot from the edge of the crowd near the band, you can see a few people looking toward the sky a second before the freeze. Not everyone, just a scatter. Someone by the food stalls craning their neck, a kid on his father's shoulders pointing up, the drummer glancing off stage. Their faces don't show fear. They show curiosity, maybe mild confusion. Someone later tries to enhance the reflection in a storefront window to see what they'd all been looking at. The best you can make out is a bloom of brightness above the square, brighter than the streetlights, whiter than the sodium lamps, without the colored streaks you'd get from fireworks. A round shape, overexposed. Then nothing. The official explanations over the years vary depending on who you ask and how much they trust you. Gas leak, mass psychosis, secret evacuation, cult. People who live in the surrounding towns have their own story. They say there was a sound, around midnight. Not a bang, not an explosion, a hum, a deep, rising tone that rattled windows without breaking them, made dogs hide and radios cut out. People 10 miles away remember waking up with their teeth chattering, not from cold, but from vibration. They looked out their bedrooms at the glow over the festival town, the familiar orange dome of streetlights and party lights. They saw that glow intensify, for a heartbeat, as if someone had turned a dimmer switch all the way up. Then, just as quickly, it sank back down. In the morning, the glow was gone. If you stand on a hill outside town now and look at it after dark, it looks normal. Street lights, porch lights, the occasional flicker of a television. If you drive in, you'll find all of those lights on timers. The utility company, after a certain amount of vandalism and trespassing, installed a simple system to bring the town to life at dusk and turn it back off at dawn. Most of the power meters have been removed, but the festival square, the main drag, and a few blocks of houses still glow at night, like a stage set waiting for actors who never show. Every so often a film crew gets permission to shoot there, a horror movie, usually, or a documentary. They bring in extras and fill the streets with artificial life. They set up scenes on the stage where the mayor once stood. The equipment always works fine. The footage always comes out, as long as they wrap before midnight. On the one production that pushed their luck, a low-budget web series about real cursed places, the director insisted on one last take of a midnight countdown scene. The crew stood in the square with plastic cups, confetti cannons, and fake fireworks on the soundtrack. An actor playing the mayor raised a microphone, grinning. Someone's phone, tucked into a pocket, recorded the whole thing. At 11:57:52, they were goofing around, repeating lines, adjusting lights. At 11:58:10, the actor squinted upward, out of character. At 11:58:14, the audio turned into a long, low hum. No one in the square remembers hearing it. On the recording, it's unmistakable. The DP swears they wrapped at 11:55, that they were already loading equipment into trucks by the time the clock in the square hit midnight. The timestamps on the camera cards back him up. But the phone, the one in the pocket, doesn't care about wrap times. Its internal clock shows 11:58 when the hum starts, and the last frame before the file corrupts is a shot of the actor playing the mayor, staring straight up, eyes wide, cup forgotten in his hand. After that, the footage is static. The actor has since moved to another state. He doesn't take roles in anything that films outside studio lots. In one panel discussion, he was asked, jokingly, if working in that town freaked him out. He smiled politely and said, "You know what freaks me out? Dead air." Then he changed the subject. 8. The 8th town looks like a stock photo for suburban living. A loop of cul-de-sacs, identical mailboxes, lawns all cut to the same height, 2-car garages, a playground in the middle with a plastic slide and a swing set that squeaks. From above, it's a pattern, curving streets and cookie-cutter roofs. From ground level, Its birthday parties and Amazon packages and HOA notices about trash cans being left out too long. It was built in the early 2000s, when developers were churning out subdivisions like this as fast as they could pour concrete. It had a name that sounded like a perfume, Whispering Pines, or Silver Creek, or something equally inoffensive. The people who moved in were young families, commuting couples, retirees downsizing but not ready to give up the idea of a yard. For the first few years, nothing unusual happened there beyond the usual suburban dramas. Fights on the neighborhood Facebook page, complaints about teenagers speeding, lost cats, a string of minor car break-ins. Then the phone started doing something no one could explain. At first, it was just a few people complaining about reception. "I lose calls every time I turn into the subdivision," one woman posted. "Anyone else?" Others chimed in. "Yeah, me too. Drops right at the entrance. Thought it was just my carrier." The cell companies ran diagnostics. Towers were fine. No outages. Then one night, all at once, every single phone registered to that development went offline within a 3-minute window after midnight. Phones on nightstands, phones in kitchen chargers, phones in teenage hands. To the carriers, it looked like every device had been put in airplane mode at the same time. At 5:47 a.m., they all came back online. This happened again the next night. And the next. People noticed, of course. They woke up to delayed notifications, missed texts, timestamps that didn't match when messages had been sent. They joked about the subdivision Bermuda Triangle. Some blamed smart meters. Others blamed the new 5G tower a few miles away. A few were unnerved. One woman, call her Ashley, set an alarm for 12:05 a.m. to see it happen. She lay in bed, phone in hand, watching the little bars in the corner. At 12:03, the bars dropped to 0. At 12:04, the Wi-Fi icon blinked out. Her husband's phone, on the nightstand, did the same thing. She tried to open a web page. No connection, it said. She got up, crossed the room, and looked out the window. The cul-de-sac outside looked normal. Porch lights, parked cars, the faint blue flicker from a TV across the street. She went downstairs, more annoyed than afraid. The router in the hall closet had a row of green lights, all solid. The cable modem showed no errors. The digital clock on the microwave read 12:03. She frowned. Her phone had turned over to 12:05. Upstairs, her husband called her name. His voice sounded wrong, thin, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. She turned back toward the stairs. For a second, just 1 second, the hallway seemed longer than it should be. The walls stretched away, the nightlight's glow receding, like she was looking down the wrong end of a camera lens. Then she blinked, and everything snapped back into place. By 5:47 a.m., when all the phones reconnected, most people chalked it up to some kind of maintenance window they hadn't been warned about. No one in the subdivision called their provider. A week later, the first welfare check came in from outside. A coworker in the city tried to reach a man who lived there after he failed to show at a meeting. Calls went straight to voicemail. Emails bounced. "Maybe he's sick," someone said. By the second missed day, they called the local police. Officers drove out, talked to the security guard at the subdivision's gate, and were waved through. The house in question had 2 cars in the driveway. The porch light was on. A package sat by the door with yesterday's date on the label. They knocked. No answer. They tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the house looked like a catalog spread. Couch pillows fluffed. Dishes rinsed in the sink. A laptop open on the kitchen island. Cursor blinking in the middle of a sentence. The officers called out. No response. They did a full sweep. Bedrooms, bathrooms, garage. Empty. In the home office, the laptop screen showed an email draft addressed to someone named Mark. The subject line read, "Something weird after midnight." The last line of the body said, "Everyone on this street keeps their lights off all night except the house at the cul-de-sac. And I swear," the sentence ended there. No period. No next word. It later pulled the router logs. At 12:01 a.m. on the last night the man was seen, the house had made one outgoing connection, a small burst of data to a cloud server. The email wasn't in his outbox. The cloud provider had no record of it being received. Whatever left that house that night, it wasn't sent through any network we know about. As officers began canvassing the neighbors, they noticed something else. At two houses next door, curtains were drawn tight. No one answered the doors. Mail was piled up inside the slots. Through the sidelight of one, an officer could see a pair of shoes neatly placed on a mat. They checked on more houses. A pattern emerged. Every home that had failed to put its phones back on the grid at 5:47 a.m., every house whose devices stayed dark in the carrier logs, was empty. Not ransacked. Not packed up. Empty like someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. In some, televisions were still on, playing to no one. In others, baby monitors hissed static in empty nurseries. Dog bowls had food in them. Cats hid under beds and hissed when officers tried to coax them out. The subdivision's security cameras, such as they were, didn't help. Footage from the entrance gate showed nothing unusual. No caravans of cars leaving in the night. No moving trucks. No emergency vehicles. Footage from a few doorbell cameras around the loop showed something else. At 12:02 a.m. on the night in question, several cameras recorded minor motion events. Tree branches, shadows, the flicker of a porch light. Then, at 12:03, all of them cut to black for 3 seconds. When the picture returned, nothing in the frame had moved. The timestamps jumped ahead by 3 seconds. No one could tell if anything had happened during the gap. The carriers provided anonymized location data for phones registered to the subdivision for that night. Every dot sat on that little loop of streets until 12:03:17. Then, nothing. No pings. No handoffs to neighboring towers. No reappearance elsewhere. It was as if a curtain had dropped over that neighborhood for a few minutes, and when it lifted, the devices were still there, but some of their owners weren't. The town, if you can call it a town, was never evacuated officially. No fences went up, no warning signs. The HOA quietly dissolved. The developer went bankrupt. The bank took possession of the houses. A few were eventually sold off at deep discounts. People who moved in years later never had their phones cut out at midnight. Whatever happened had happened once. But some of them have stories about waking up at 12:03 on random nights with their hearts pounding for no reason. About standing at their bedroom windows, looking out at the cul-de-sac, and seeing every porch light on except the one at the very end. About the one house, always one, that seems a little darker than the rest, a little quieter, even when a car is in the driveway and toys are on the lawn. They tell themselves they're imagining it. They tell themselves they're just spooking themselves with old news articles. They tell themselves that what happened here was a fluke, a glitch in the network, a one-time thing. Then their phone buzzes with a notification it should have delivered 5 hours earlier, and for a second, standing there in a cul-de-sac where a whole street once went offline together, they wonder if there's some other system, bigger than cell towers and cloud servers, that occasionally updates the world in batches. And if one night their address might be in the next batch, that's all 8 towns. Each of them has records, police reports, utility logs, eyewitness accounts that try to explain what happened in the language we have: outages, accidents, relocations, glitches. None of that quite covers the feeling you get when you realize how often the real world leaves gaps. Gaps shaped like towns. Gaps shaped like nights. Gaps shaped exactly like the distance between 11:58 p.m. and 12:03 a.m., when the clocks stutter and the cameras freeze and, for a handful of people in a handful of forgotten places, morning never comes. If you're hearing this late at night, in a quiet room, maybe with the rest of your house asleep around you, I want you to think about something simple. Most towns don't disappear all at once. Most of them just become easier not to notice. A store closes. A family moves. A streetlight burns out, and no one hurries to replace it. The old diner, where everyone used to meet after football games, turns into a payday loan place, then a boarded-up shell, then eventually a weed-covered lot that newer kids can't even imagine ever mattered. That kind of disappearance feels normal. Sad, maybe, but normal. What makes these 8 places different is that normal doesn't fit what happened to them. Not really. A town removed from the map before the people in it were fully gone. A dead rail line carrying something silent through the dark. A crossroads where every clock stopped in the same 2-minute span. A reservoir where the drowned shape of an older town seemed to reach back through the water. A company town that thinned from the inside until houses stood full of furniture and empty of people. A highway town where the replacements behind curtained windows never quite learned how to act alive. A festival square that froze in front of 100 cameras. A subdivision where every phone dropped off the grid at once, as if some larger network had decided to stop acknowledging that little patch of earth for a while. You can call those things coincidences if you want. You can call them folklore, mistakes in paperwork, misremembered timelines, corrupted files, stress, sleep deprivation, grief. And to be fair, that's what the official world usually does. It takes whatever happened, flattens it into administrative language, and files it somewhere people won't look too closely. Undetermined cause, unable to verify, no active leads, case remains open. That language does something comforting. It makes it sound like the mystery is still sitting safely inside a folder, waiting to be solved by the right person with the right evidence. But some mysteries don't feel unsolved. They feel contained. As if the purpose of the report isn't to explain what happened, but to draw a line around it. To say, whatever this was, it happened here, to these people, on this date. It is not your problem. It is not moving. It is not spreading. And maybe that's true. Maybe these places were isolated failures. Tiny tears in the fabric, stitched shut fast enough that the rest of the world could go on pretending the cloth was never damaged in the first place. Or maybe the only reason they seem isolated is because most of us don't keep track of the patterns long enough to see them. Because think about how many little black spaces there are in your own mental map. How many roads you drive without learning the names of the houses on them. How many tiny towns you pass and instantly forget. How many glowing windows you've seen from a highway at 1 a.m. and never once wondered whether the people behind them would still be there by morning. That's the part that gets under my skin. Not the idea of ghosts, not even the possibility of something supernatural. It's the possibility that entire communities can slip sideways out of the world, and the machinery around them is so used to losing small things that it barely stutters. A utility meter flatlines. A route gets optimized. A file goes missing from a shelf. A cloud server records one outgoing burst of data and then nothing. A camera skips 3 seconds. A dispatcher hears silence on the line and marks it as a bad connection. Life is held together by systems, and systems are very good at smoothing over gaps. If one household goes dark, that's a missed payment. If one person doesn't come home, that's a missing persons case. If one town empties, that's economic decline, annexation, clerical error, urban migration, deterioration, blight. There's always a name available that sounds less frightening than the truth. And the truth, whatever it is, may not even be dramatic in the way we imagine horror to be. Maybe no one screams. Maybe no one runs. Maybe in some of these places, the people involved saw something in the sky above the square, or down the line beyond the crossing, or beneath the surface of the reservoir, and all it did was interrupt reality, just enough that they stepped toward it before they understood what they were doing. Maybe the most terrifying thing isn't violence. Maybe it's compliance. The husband stepping onto the dock because he thinks he heard a raccoon. The neighbors walking toward the depot because they think the old train is finally back. The festival crowd tilting their heads up at the exact same moment. The office worker standing in the kitchen, halfway through an email, because they noticed one house on the cul-de-sac keeping its lights off in a pattern that didn't make sense. That's what I keep returning to. How ordinary the last moments always seem. No grand confrontation, no monster roaring out of the dark, no sudden understanding of cosmic truth. Just curiosity, routine. One more look, one more minute, and then absence. There's something especially cruel about that, because it means the edge between a normal life and a vanished one might be thinner than we want to believe. It might be a porch step, a dock plank, a yellow safety line by dead railroad tracks, a hallway that looks slightly longer than it should for just 1 second, a clock reading 12:03 and failing to move. If you grew up in a small town, you probably know the kind of silence I mean. Not city silence, which is never really silent. Not suburban silence, softened by HVAC hum and traffic in the distance. I mean the silence that settles over a rural place after midnight, when the roads are empty and the darkness between houses feels deeper than it has any right to. The kind where you can hear your own footsteps too clearly. The kind where a dog barking half a mile away sounds like a warning. Now imagine that same silence, but wrong. Too complete. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of permission for sound to exist. That's what so many witnesses tried and failed to describe. A hum with no source. A ringing in the ears where there should have been engine noise. A blackout in a phone signal that wasn't interference but omission. A moment when the world didn't seem broken so much as briefly replaced by a version of itself with fewer moving parts. And if that sounds abstract, it's because the people who brush up against things like this often lose the ability to talk about them plainly. The diner owner with the pie he never delivered again. The diver who never returned to that depth. The trucker who stopped taking that route. The actor who joked about dead air and changed the subject. The deputy who wrote likely hoax in his notebook because any other phrase would have followed him home. People create rituals around what frightens them. They stop opening curtains after dark. They don't stand too close to the tracks after midnight. They don't walk the dog by the water once the clock passes 12. They stop saying the old name of a place out loud. And over time, those rituals start to look like common sense, and then eventually like nothing at all. That's how you end up with stories that survive without details. Someone says, "Don't stop there too late." Someone else says, "That corner's bad ground." A grandmother says, "If you see lights on the water, come inside." No explanation, just rules. By the time the next generation asks why, the people who knew the specifics are dead, or moved away, or taught themselves not to remember too clearly. So the warning loses its weight, and the pattern gets one more chance. I don't know what these places were touched by. Maybe it was one thing wearing different masks. Maybe it was several unrelated phenomena that all happened to rhyme in disturbing ways. Maybe some of them were flesh and blood crimes wrapped in local fear and bureaucratic failure, and others were genuinely stranger than anything law enforcement could process. But I do know this: the world has more blind spots than we like to admit. There are places where records don't line up, where memory goes soft around the edges, where systems that are supposed to overlap and confirm each other instead produce a neat little void. And human beings are remarkably willing to keep driving past a void as long as the road is still open and the gas station takes cards. That, more than any creature or curse, feels like the real horror. The ease of continuation. The fact that the next town over still opens for breakfast. The mail still gets sorted. Kids still go to school. A council still approves paving contracts and holiday decorations, while 1 square mile over, a subdivision is being repossessed house by house because no one can find the owners. The machine keeps moving. Maybe it has to. Maybe if we all stopped every time reality developed a crack, nothing would function. But if you've stayed with me through all 8 of these stories, then you've probably felt what I felt, reading through case notes and old local accounts and archived comments posted by people who sounded embarrassed by what they remembered. That little click in your head when separate things start aligning. Midnight, silence, lights where lights shouldn't be, people looking up, people stepping closer, clocks stopping, phones going dead, morning arriving to a town that still has all its objects, but none of its owners. Once you notice that rhythm, it gets harder to ignore. You start wondering how many ghost towns were really just failed economies, and how many were something stranger that happened before anyone had cameras, databases, or utility logs. You start wondering whether some old legends about villages abandoned overnight were less superstitious than we assume. You start wondering whether the map we trust is only as stable as the systems constantly refreshing it. And if those systems ever fail together, power, signal, memory, language, how long would it take before your town looked like it had never really been full to begin with? That's the final thought I want to leave you with tonight. Not that every quiet town is cursed. Not that every dead signal zone hides a doorway. Not that every late night light on a lake means something is coming out of the water. Just this, if you ever find yourself in a place that suddenly feels edited, a road that seems too empty, a neighborhood where every porch light is on but no voices carry, a railroad crossing lowering for no train, a town square where people stop and look upward all at once, a digital clock that reads 12:03 a.m. for a little too long, trust the oldest part of your mind. Leave. Don't stay to get proof. Don't pull out your phone and start recording. Don't walk closer because curiosity is stronger than fear. There are stories where curiosity saves people. These aren't those stories. In these stories, curiosity is the hand on the doorknob. It's the step onto the dock. It's the glance through the curtain. It's the last ordinary choice a person makes before they become one more gap for someone else to explain away. And maybe, years from now, if enough paperwork gets misplaced and enough people convince themselves they must be remembering wrong, even that gap will smooth over. A house will be sold. A route will be redrawn. A field will reclaim a driveway. A photo will lose its label. A town will become an empty patch of land people pass without slowing down. And someone, somewhere, will still have the uneasy feeling that there used to be something there, something with lights, something with voices, something that was alive until just after midnight. Then even that feeling will fade, and the road will keep going, straight through the dark, as if nothing at all was ever missing, and that should be the end of it. The credits roll in your head, the music fades, you turn off the light or take out your earbuds or switch apps. You tell yourself it was just stories, but I want you to try a small experiment when this is over. When you next step outside at night, maybe to take out the trash, maybe to sit on a porch, maybe just to walk to your car, pause for a moment and really look at where you live. Not at the street name on the sign, not at the pin on your Maps app, at the details. How many houses can you actually see from where you're standing? How many of them have lights on? How many of those lit windows show you anything? Movement, silhouettes, the flicker of a TV, that proves someone is inside right now. If you're in a city, that answer might be a lot. If you're in a small town, or a suburb, or out where the roads stop getting sidewalks, the answer might surprise you. You might realize you've been filling the dark spaces with assumptions, assuming the house with the single porch light has people in it because it always has before, assuming the dim glow in the upstairs window means someone's reading, not that they left a lamp on out of habit, assuming the blue flash behind curtains is a TV, not a reflection from something outside. We do this constantly. It's one of the ways our brains keep the world from being terrifying all the time. We stitch continuity into the gaps whether we've earned that continuity or not. The people in the 8 towns I told you about did that too. They assumed the dead rail line was always dead. They assumed the lake was just water. They assumed the crossroads was just another corner in a miles-long grid of corners. They assumed the distribution center was just a job. They assumed the highway houses refilled with more neighbors, not something that didn't need neighbors. They assumed the festival would end the way it always had, with fireworks and drunk laughter and a sleepy drive home. They assumed the subdivision's network glitch was annoying, not existential. They assumed tomorrow would look roughly like today. They were right, until they weren't. You might never see anything like what they saw. You might live your entire life without ever feeling a hum in the air at midnight that doesn't have a source, or watching a whole town square tilt its head toward the sky in the same heartbeat, or noticing a column of light standing in the middle of a lake with no boat beneath it. But if you do, even for a second, even in a way you can talk yourself out of later, if a road you know by heart feels wrong all of a sudden, if the silence in a familiar place thickens until it feels like something you could touch, if every phone, all at once, dies in your hand while the clocks keep going, if you find yourself at 12:03 a.m. staring at something that isn't supposed to be there, remember the 8 places that didn't get a second chance. Remember that the people in them weren't stupid. They were tired, curious, kind, distracted, practical, normal. They did what you're supposed to do. They checked on noises. They went to see. They trusted the old timetable. They opened the door because someone knocked. They stepped out because they didn't want to feel silly the next day, explaining why they'd been scared of nothing. If there's a moral to any of these stories, it's not never go outside after midnight. Life doesn't work like that. Some people have to be out. Nurses, night shift workers, truckers, parents with crying babies, cops. The moral, if there is one, is simpler. When something doesn't fit, really doesn't fit, believe that feeling long enough to get yourself out of range. You can always be embarrassed later. You can't always get a replay. So take the trash out, walk the dog, get in the car, drive home at 1 a.m., pass through the half-lit towns with the one gas station and the closed diner and the quiet houses. Just pay attention. Listen for silence that feels like a decision. Watch for lights where there shouldn't be lights. Notice when the world around you seems to hesitate, like a program lagging before the next screen loads. And if you ever find yourself at the edge of a place that feels like it's being written out of the story while you're still standing in it, don't wait around to see whether you're in the last sentence. Step back, get in the truck, cross the tracks, leave the dock, take the earlier exit, drive to the next town that still has a name on the map. And if you can't shake the feeling, later, that you abandoned something you'll never quite be able to prove was real, that's fine. Some towns die because people stop believing in them. Others survive only because someone did, just long enough to get away.